Good day everyone. Today I will discuss the lesson 1 in international trade, which is the introduction to international trade. Countries benefits when they specialize in producing goods for which they have comparative advantage and engage in trade for other goods. International trade is the exchange of capital, goods, and services across international borders or territories. Each nation should produce goods which its domestic opportunity costs are lower than the domestic opportunity costs or other nations and exchange those goods for products that have higher domestic opportunity costs compared to other nations. Benefits of trade include lower prices, better product for consumers, improved political ties among nations, and efficiency gains for domestic producer. International trade is the exchange of capital and goods and services across international borders or territories. Trading partners reap mutual gains when each nation specializes in goods for which it holds a comparative advantage and then engages in trade for other products. In other words, each nation should produce goods for which its domestic opportunity costs are lower than the domestic opportunity costs of other nations and exchange those goods for products that have higher domestic opportunity costs compared to other nations. Countries benefit from producing goods in which they have comparative advantage and trading for goods in which other countries have the comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is the ability of a party to produce particular good or service at a lower marginal and opportunity cost over another. In addition to comparative advantage, other reasons for trade include differences in factor endorsement. Countries have different amounts of land, labor, and capital. Gains from specializations. Countries may gain economies of scale from specialization, experience long-run average cost declines as output increases. Another is political benefits, which countries can leverage trade to forge closer cultural and political bonds. International connection also has promote diplomatic solution to international problems. Another is efficiency gains, which domestic firms will force to become a more efficient in order to be competitive in the global market. Benefits of increased competition. A greater degree of competition leads to lower prices for consumers, greater responsiveness to consumer wants and needs, and wider variety of products. To summarize, international trade benefits mostly all incumbents and generates substantial value for the global economy. Understanding the production possibilities. The production possibilities frontier show the combination of output that can be produced using available inputs. The production possibilities curve shows the maximum possible production level of one commodity for any production level of another, given the existing levels of the factors of production and the state of technology. Points outside the production possibilities curve are attainable with existing resources and technology if trade does not occur in an external producer. Without trade, each country consumes only what it produces. However, because of specialization and trade, the absolute quantity of goods available for consumption is higher than the quantity that will be available under national economic self-sufficiency. In economics, the production possibility frontier is a graph that shows combination of two commodities that could be produced using the same total amount of the factors of production. It shows the maximum possible production level of the one commodity of any production level of another, giving the existing levels of the factors of production and state of technology. Normally, extended output around the origin, but can also represented as straight line. If the economy is operating below the curve, it is operating inefficiently because resources could be radically allocated in order to produce more or one or both goods without decreasing the quantity of either. Points outside the curve are attainable with existing resources and technology if trade does not occur with an outside producer. Without trade, each country consumes only what it produces. In instances, the production possibility frontier is also consumption possibilities frontier. Trade enables consumption outside the production possibility. Defining what is absolute advantage. A country has an absolute advantage in production of goods when it can produce it more efficiently than other countries. A country that has an absolute advantage can produce a good at lower marginal cost. A country with absolute advantage can sell the goods for less than the country that does not have the absolute advantage. Absolute advantage differs from comparative advantage, which refers to the ability to produce specific goods at a lower opportunity cost. It refers the ability of the country to produce a good more efficiently than other countries. In other words, a country that has absolute advantage can produce a good with lower marginal cost. It differs from the comparative advantage, which refers to the ability of a country to produce specific goods at a lower opportunity cost. A country with an absolute advantage can sell the goods for less than a country does not have the absolute advantage. For example, the Canadian economy, which is rich in low-cost land, has an absolute advantage in agricultural production relative to some other countries. China and other Asian economies export low-cost manufactured goods, which take advantage of their much lower unit labor costs. Many consumer electronics are manufactured in China. China can produce such goods more efficiently, which give it an absolute advantage relative to many countries. Imagine that the economy A can produce 5 wedges per hour with 3 workers. Economy B can produce 10 wedges per hour with 3 workers. Assuming that the workers of the both economies are paid equally, Economy B has an absolute advantage over Economy A in producing wedges per hour. This is because Economy B can produce twice as many wedges as Economy B with the same number of workers. Party B has an absolute advantage in producing wedges. It can produce more wedges with the same amount of resources than Party A. If there is no trade, then each country will consume what it produces. A country has a comparative advantage over when it produces a good service at a lower opportunity cost. Even if one country has an absolute advantage in production of all goods, it can still benefit from trade. Countries should import goods if the opportunity cost of importing is lower than the cost of producing them locally. Specialization according to comparative advantage result is more efficient allocation of world resources. A larger quantity of output becomes available to the trading nation. Competitive advantage is distinct from comparative advantage because it has to do with distinguished attributes which can be necessarily related to a lower opportunity cost. Comparative advantage refers to ability of a party to produce a particular good or services at a lower marginal and opportunity cost over another, even if one country is more efficient in the production of all goods. More specifically, countries should import goods if the opportunity cost of importing is lower than the cost of producing them locally. Specialization according to comparative advantage result in a more efficient allocation of world resources. Larger outputs of both products become available to both nations. The outcome of international specialization and trade is equivalent to a nation having a more or better resources or discovering improved production techniques. Imagine that there are two nations, Shiplandia and Etertania, that currently produce their own computer chips and CD players. Shiplandia uses less time to produce both products, while Etertania uses time to produce the both products. Shiplandia enjoys the absolute advantage and ability to produce an item with fewer resources. However, the accompanying table shows that Shiplandia has a comparative advantage in computer chip production, while Eritrea has a comparative advantage in the production of CD player. The nations can benefit from specialization and trade, which will make the allocation of resources more efficient across both countries. As a result, Chiplandia has a comparative advantage in producing computer chips, while Eritrea has a comparative advantage in producing CD players. Both nations can benefit from trade. Comparative versus competitive advantage. It is important to distinguish between comparative advantage and competitive advantage. Though they sound similar, they are different concepts. Unlike competitive advantage refers to a distinguished attribute of a company or a product. It may or may not have anything to do with opportunity cost or efficiency. For example, having a good brand recognition or relationship with supplier. It is a competitive advantage but not a comparative advantage. In the context of international trade, we we more often discuss the comparative advantage. This is the example of comparative versus competitive advantage, which result the country A has an absolute advantage in making both food and clothing, but a comparative advantage only in food. Whenever a country has a comparative advantage in production, it can benefit from specialization and trade. However, specialization can both positive and negative effects on nation's economy. The effects of specialization include greater efficiency, with countries specialize in areas that they are naturally good and also benefit from increasing returns to scale for the production of this good. Another is consumer benefits. Specialization means that the opportunity cost of the production is lower, which that globally more goods are produced and prices are lower. Consumer benefit from these lower prices and greater quantity of goods. Another one is opportunity for competitive sectors, which firms gain access to the whole world market, which allows them to grow bigger and to be benefit further from economies of scale. Gains from Gains from trade. Suppose that Britain and Portugal each produce wine and cloth. Britain has a comparative advantage in cloth and Portugal in wine. By specializing and then trading, Britain can get a unit of wine for only 100 units of labor by trading cloth for labor instead of taking 110 units of labor to produce the wine. Similarly, Portugal can specialize wine and get a unit of cloth for only 80 units of labor by trading instead of 90 units of labor it will take to produce the cloth domestically. Each country will continue to trade until the price equals the opportunity cost, and at which point it will decide to just produce the goods domestically instead of trading. Of course, there are also some potential downsides to specialization. Threats to uncompetitive sectors. Some parts of economy may not able to compete with cheaper or better imports. Another is risk of over specialization. Global demand may shift so that there is no longer demand for the goods and services produced by the country. Strategic Vulnerability, relying on another country for vital resources, makes a country dependent on the country. Political or economic changes in the second country may impact the supply of goods and services available to the first. As a whole, economies generally support specialization and trade between nations. Relationship between specialization and trade. Comparative advantage is the driving force of specialization and trade. Nations decide whether they should export or import goods based on comparative advantages. Generally, nations can consume more by specializing in a good and trading for other goods. When countries decide which country will specialize in which product, the essential question becomes who could produce and the product at a lower opportunity cost. Specialization refers to the tendency of countries to specialize in certain product which they trade for other goods rather than producing all consumption goods for their own. Countries produce a surplus of the product in which they specialize and trade for the different surplus good for another country. The traders decide on whether they should export or import goods depending on comparative advantage. Imagine that there are two countries and both countries produce only two products. They can only choose to be self-sufficient because they have the ability to produce both products. However, specialization in the product for which they have comparative advantage and trading would allow both countries to consume more than they would on their own. That's all for our lesson 1. Thank you.